Now to our speaker, Maggie Hyde. Welcome, Maggie. Maggie Hyde is an astrologer and a diviner. In 1983, she co-founded and directed the Company of Astrologers, a London-based teaching body. Her love of the symbolic led to an MA in mysticism and cosmology at the University of Kent. And she was a guest lecturer there and on the MA in myth, cosmology and the sacred at Christ Church University, Canterbury. Maggie has written many varied astrology columns for the press and popular market in the UK and abroad, and she's interested in the development of psychoanalysis as a form of divination. Her books include Jung and Astrology, written for astrologers, and the cartoon book Introducing Jung. Her cartoon book, Astrology for Beginners, co-written with Geoffrey Cornelius, is due to be reprinted soon with new illustrations by Zia Musafir. Maggie lives in Kent, where she offers consultations in astrology, tarot, the I Ching, as well as astrological supervision by phone and Skype at present. Maggie also teaches and runs horoscope discussion webinars for the Company of Astrologers, especially the Stars on Sunday chart discussion webinar, due to begin again in the autumn. So Maggie, welcome to our Zoom room. We are so pleased to see you. So tonight, tell us what your subject is and tell us all about it.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Pamela. It's great to be back. I think this is a return to Aquarius 7 for me, because I did a talk many years ago when we could all still actually meet in person. And I just think Graham and you on the committee have done a fabulous job to get so many webinars organised. It's very impressive. So, difficult times. We've all had these difficult times. And when I was arranging this talk with Graham, he suggested that many of us are now looking forward and thinking of the best ways that we can grow and prosper as this pandemic recedes, hopefully. So I'm going to address prosperity, but if we're going to think about how it shows in astrology, in a birth chart or a horary, because I love horary astrology, it raises for me the question of what prosperity is and how astrology can help us to realize it. So we ordinarily think of prosperity as doing well, right, as growing and being enriched. And it isn't just luck, about being a lucky person. We often think of prosperity in monetary terms as well, and how rich a person is, how prosperous. But I think prosperity has got very little to do with riches and with cash value. That's my view. Money has little to do with true value and with what makes us prosper or feel we have a good fortune. So we experience good fortune in many other areas of our lives, in our jobs, in our careers, in our children, you know, in our creative activities, or in our even property. Perhaps we could be fortunate with property, but even these can be thought of as external things that happen to us rather than we happening to them. So we might think of a person who's born with a silver spoon into a good family and so on. But as I hope to show tonight, good fortune comes from within. It is created by our actions, and it may even come from the way we handle bad luck. So prosperity has a spiritual and a psychological dimension. It's connected with achievement, progress, fulfillment, and often both cash and the spiritual can come together. And in some cultures, an acquisition of riches is tied up with a spiritual orientation, and a good person prospers and a bad person doesn't. Well, that's the theory. I don't know if that's always the case, but that's the theory. So if I look astrologically at good fortune, in shorthand astro jargon, we as astrologers think here of the benefic and the malefic tradition of the planets in astrology. Venus as the lesser benefic, Jupiter as the greater benefic, Mars and Saturn the lesser and greater malefics. So we attribute prosperity and good fortune to Jupiter, failure to prosper to Saturn. The sun is also generally on the prosperity side, and the moon is a bit more ambivalent, depending much more on her sign and aspects. But this is very, very general, I understand that. But note also that when we talk about prosperity and good fortune, this may not be quite the same as luck. Who knows what luck is, or why some people just seem to be lucky? Luck doesn't seem to link to any kind of virtue or to the lack of it. So really good, ethical people don't win the lottery if we see cash as luck. And sometimes there seems to be no explanation as to why certain individuals who we might think have got questionable ethics turn out to be lucky generals. But the question to put to you and to keep in the back of your mind as we go through this stuff today is to ask, is luck the same as prosperity anyway? And where does that leave us, luck or prosperity, in relation to good fortune? So I'm rolling around all these things, and I hope that through showing you horoscopes, we'll be able to get some sort of clarity into this world. So first of all, I thought we might take a look at the etymology of the word prosper. So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. So let's have a look at the etymology of prosperity. It's from the Latin here, which is pro, for, and the ablative, whatever that might be, I'll leave it to you to work out, for spes, meaning hope. And when you look up these definitions, there's a very interesting one I like. It's to be successful, to thrive, to advance in any good thing. Notice a good thing. It's also with hope, full of hope, agreeable to one's wishes, according to expectation, according to one's hope. But the one I like the most is prosperos, which means doing well, right? So we do well when we prosper, we do well. And that reminds me of a catchphrase in, I don't know if some of you would have seen the TV series Friends, where Joey asks in his New York accent, how are you doing? You know, how are you doing? Well, it's a common conversation opener here too in the UK, isn't it? How are you doing? And in reply, you know, we know how we're doing. We're doing well or not so well. We're just doing so-and-so or not very well at all. But please note, in this etymology of prosperity, the doing well, that the active word is doing. And I want to put to you, who is doing the doing here? The prosperous person is doing the doing. And this throws the onus right onto us. We are doing something that makes us well, and it's up to us and our action. And this is very important when we consider prosperity in relation to astrology, I think, because the celestial movements of the planets and signs at birth and the transits and progressions, whatever timing measures you use, they're not doing anything to us. And in thinking of celestial phenomena as gods or the divine, if they are the gods, then the gods themselves are not predetermining our fate, letting us prosper or not prosper. It is we who are doing the well or the not so well. So when we consider how prosperity is shown by the horoscope, we're not seeing a predetermined objective fate about prosperity or otherwise. We're seeking to find in the symbols a way in which we, by our own doing and actions, can bring about prosperity. And in astrology, this has been called Finding the Line of Good Fortune, which was the title that I wanted to make for this talk. Finding the Line of Good Fortune, and we'll discuss that further shortly. So we therefore need to consider how we do well, and if astrology can show us how we can do well, not whether we will or won't do well, if you take my meaning, and have good fortune, but how we can do well and have good fortune. That is, act in ways which enable us to prosper. Now, this can throw up some very complicated symbolism in a horoscope, but the key first step is to realize that we are the key players in the game of good fortune. We are active agents, creators of prosperity and fortune, and not simply recipients of an objective predetermined fate. And the more we know ourselves, as the Oracle at Delphi always says, the better able we are to create good fortune for ourselves. So I hope to explain this as we go along. So here I am whittling on the only way I have as an astrologer is to understand these things through horoscopes and through charts. So let me show you a chart. It's a horary chart, but if you aren't familiar with the horary method, its symbolism will still make sense to you, I'm sure. So horary is looking at the chart, for those of you who don't know horary, looking at the chart for when a question is asked. Bonkers to some, even astrologers I know, but then again, what in astrology isn't bonkers is what I think. This question was asked by a young man in pursuit of a young woman. Oh, what's new then? And the question is, if I can move it on, there it is there any hope with X? That was the man's question. And X was a young woman whom he was in pursuit of, right? So let me tell you what the situation was for this young man. He'd known this woman for quite a while, a friend of a friend, for about 5 years. She lived 200 miles away, apparently, and they'd only met through mutual friends about 3 or 4 times a year. And despite this, they'd formed an attachment, and he did realise it was rather an idealised attachment. He did rather adore her. And on one occasion, they went out on a date, during which they kissed for the first time. Isn't this romantic? However, when the querent rang her afterwards, by querent, I mean the person asking the question. In Horary, we call that person the querent. When the man rang her afterwards, she told him that she couldn't just be friends with him, and she didn't want to get involved either, right? And in despair, the young man asked this question. So let's have a look at how we would approach that. Is there any hope with X? This does link to the idea, I hope you will see soon, of hope in terms of prosperity and good fortune. So he's asking, is there any hope with her? So when you have a chart like this, the man asking the question is going to be shown by the planet which rules the ascendant, which is Jupiter, because Jupiter is Sagittarius. Ignore the Neptune sitting there for a minute. We find Jupiter in the 11th house in Sagittarius. Now, Jupiter is the planet of hope, isn't it? And Sagittarius is the most hopeful of signs, you know. So he's asking about hope. He has really high, big hopes of this relationship. And so where is she? Where is she? Well, she officially, she's the planet that rules over the opposite house to him, you know, the relationship, marriage, partnership house, which is the 7th. So you've got Gemini there. And the planet that rules over Gemini is Mercury. So she is the Mercury, and she is in Capricorn in his house, but retrograde, right? So that indicates that we're quite wondering about her state of mind, because maybe she's going to turn at some point, isn't she? Mercury is going to turn direct. But when you look to the 7th house of the partnership point, you find the moon is sitting there, and the moon is at 27 Gemini. And so that could also signify the woman, couldn't it? Or it could just signify the man as well and his desire for a partnership with her, because in Horary, the moon is always telling us something about the person asking the question. So what we do is we look to see how they all are relating up. And we're looking to see if this man, the Jupiter, has got any hope with this woman, the Mercury. And the way we would tell that would be to see if they're in an aspect with each other. So Jupiter is 5 Sagittarius, Mercury is 16 Capricorn. That is not an in aspect, it's not forming any relationship. So we would think, that's not really a possibility. And we'd look to see if the moon is going to join them up, or if the moon is joining him or her, because it could be him or it could be her. But the moon at 27 Gemini isn't joining up the Jupiter, isn't joining up the Mercury either. So not in aspect. So you might be, if you're thinking at that point, there are no relations between these two people. that are positive and are showing good fortune, and they are coming together. And you might also note that our man with his Jupiter in Sagittarius, he's 5 Sagittarius 41, and the last thing that happened to that Jupiter was the Sun made a sextile to him, Sun at 5 Aquarius 42. So what a big hope there that he's got. But you see, in Horary, it's a separating aspect, because it's an aspect that has been made and not one that is going to be made. So we've had a look at all, you know, the chart seems very, what we would call radical, that it seems to describe the situation. But there's something hugely there that we want to look at. We always look at where the moon is going in a horary, and we see that the moon at 27 Gemini is opposing Neptune at 28 Sagittarius. And that is right across the relationship horizon. So the fact that Neptune is sitting there and the moon is going to oppose Neptune, you know, it would be an indicator of a real confusion about relationships, wouldn't it? Because Neptune, it's not in a good aspect to the moon, it's not in a good aspect to anything. So that there is the moon opposite Neptune. So in a sense, a horary astrologer might be inclined to say, you know, look, the moon's opposite Neptune, he's kidding himself, you know, he's under an illusion that there's a relationship here. There's nothing joining the people together. The woman is going to go change her direction, and there's nothing really happening here. So we would call that in horary, nothing perfects, nothing is made, nothing comes together from perfective, you know, to make and to happen. So you would say, well, I'm sorry, there's no hope with X, right? And the astrologer could objectively judge that there was no hope. And in lots of horary books, I'm afraid, this is the sort of thing that you will happen. You'll get the astrologer standing back at a distance saying yay or nay, you know, it's predetermined, this relationship or not, right? And do you see what's gone wrong here? I want to ask you, do you see what has gone wrong here? I hope you do. The astrologer is only judging the planetary movements, and those planetary movements cannot simply be equated with fate. And planetary motion doesn't show the unfolding of human fate, because the man isn't doing anything, is he? Going back to our prosperity, you know, you do well or you don't do well, but what is he doing? He's doing nothing, right? He's taking no action in the situation. He's just hoping. Well, hope, you know, last thing in the box, wasn't it? Hope. So Jupiter's applying to Uranus, and he's hoping astrology will tell him the truth about the situation, as if there's a predetermined objective truth, that a relationship between him and X is a fated thing and it's meant by the cosmos, so you are going to see this cosmic pattern. There is no sense of him creating his own fortune with the woman. So this is why I think the moon is going to Neptune. It's simply showing a void in a way, isn't it? It's like a cloudy, insubstantial non-hope. He's got no substance in it. He's not actually, you know, got a desire or a movement or a motion that he's putting. He just wants to know what's going to happen without him doing anything. And I'm sure that if you do astrology and you see people, you'll often come across this sort of attitude. And it isn't really why we practice astrology and do divinations. Whether you're doing astrology or tarot or I Ching, the purpose of divination is to resolve doubts. And through the ritual act of creating a divinatory space in which, through the symbols, a core issue which matters to the participant can be resolved. And when such resolution happens, good fortune can happen, because the individual can pursue what is of true value to him or her. There's no true value in this horoscope. So we're not going to dwell on that much further. And what I would like to ask you to think about now is this way of treating astrology is not going to bring us good fortune, right? It's just going to be asking for a yes/no answer from the heavens, and it's not trustworthy. So to look at this, what might bring us good fortune, I'd like to consider the thoughts of the Renaissance Italian philosopher and the man of the cloth, Marsilio Ficino. And as many of you would be familiar with him, but his idea about the birth chart and good fortune are tied up with his understanding of a guardian angel, or what he would call a daimon. So let's take a look at this and see if we can see something that Ficino might teach us about good fortune and the line of good fortune in the horoscope. Okay, so I'm going to just quickly run through this. Do explore Ficino. He's fascinating. He was an astrologer and knew lots about astrology. And on this first page of his, he's urging us to do what we love. And this is the purpose of our soul, and the soul knows and loves it. And if we engage in what our soul loves to do, the gods bless us and good fortune ensues, because we are doing what we love. So, and this creates this harmony between the divine and the mortal, between gods and men. So Ficino says, whoever is born possessed of a sound mind is naturally formed by the heavens for some honourable work and way of life. Whoever therefore wants to have the heavens propitious, let him undertake above all this work, this way of life. Let him pursue it zealously, for the heavens favour his undertakings. Assuredly, for this above all else you were made by nature. The activity which from tender years you do, speak, play act, choose, dream, imitate. That activity which you try more frequently, which you perform more easily, in which you make the most progress, which you enjoy above all else, which you leave off unwillingly. That assuredly is the thing for which the heavens and the Lord of the horoscope gave birth to you. I think that's a fabulous quote from Ficino. And he's not finished there. He goes on, if that's not enough, let's see what else he has to say in relation to this daimon. Therefore, they, the daimons, the spirits, the deities, the daimons, the guardian angels, they will promote your undertakings and will favour your life to the extent that you follow the auspices of the Lord of your genitor, especially if that Platonic doctrine is true, with which all antiquity agrees, that every person has at birth one certain daimon, the guardian of his life, assigned by his own personal star, which helps him to that very task to which the celestials summoned him when he was born. And this links directly to the horoscope now, doesn't it? He quotes Plato's work on the daimon. Our guardian angel will protect and help us if we do the things we love. And it's very important, and it's often relevant when people are unhappy. They try things and they don't work. But if you aren't following what you love and what your soul knows you're here to do, why would your guardian angel try to help you? I mean, you'd just be heading on a wrong path. And of course, the daimon isn't going to help you go wrong, right? And in fact, if you carry on stubbornly going ways that don't suit you and aren't meant for you, the said daimon is quite likely to desert you and just leave you to it, could just get fed up with you, right? So what is fascinating here is that Ficino refers back to the horoscope, to being able to know the daimon through the chart. And this has prompted astrologers to think they can find a part of daimon or a fortunate signature to show the daimon, or the ruler of the chart, or the almuten, or whatever. But it is a bit sad to say, I think it doesn't work like that. It's far more complex, in my experience, that when you're looking at a chart, than thinking you can just locate a symbol for the daimon and off you go on your path of good fortune. Occasionally, I think you do get a glimmer of when someone isn't following what they love to do and is unhappily in the wrong place. I mean, for example, There was a woman I spoke with once who was very dissatisfied with her London office job. Right, she hated it. She didn't know what she wanted to do though. And she had Venus in Aries in the 10th. And I asked her, was there any time she had really loved her work in the past? And she said, yes. When she lived in Ireland, she'd been a shepherdess for a while. And as she was telling me about what it was like to be a shepherdess, she just lit up. She just lit up, telling me about being in the open air, chasing around after those airy sheep, you know. And clearly, a London office job gave her no joy whatsoever. Venus is a joy, isn't it? No joy. Once she knew this, her choices became easier for her. And one of her first steps was to go back to Ireland, you know, to chase sheep to heart's content, I assume. So, how does the birth chart help us find our line of good fortune? That's my question to you. It's much more complex than Horary, because I've never yet seen a wonderful chart full of lovely symbols, prosperity, good fortune, right? There's always so many shades of grey, and we know how plastic and double-edged that symbols are. So a poorly placed planet can signify good things. I mean, Venus in Aries is in detriment, isn't it? But, you know, if you want to be a shepherdess, go for it. So a poorly placed planet can signify good things with the right perception, and a gloriously dignified trine can be a just total waste of space, right? Now, I'm exaggerating, of course, but the point is that the symbols in the chart are what we make of them in the context of an individual's concerns and situation, and in dialogue with that individual. And also through tradition, the methods in natal astrology indicate possibilities of good or ill fortune, depending on how we take them up and what we do with them. So they find the best way through. If there's difficulty in a symbol, for example, a good astrologer will talk about that to the person, and between them, they find the best way through. They find and create the line of good fortune. Now, it's hard for me to illustrate this with you, but by using a chart of a famous person, because I can't really use charts of, you know, clients, because people you don't know and they're very complicated. But using a chart of a famous person, I can give you some pointers, right? Of course, I haven't had any direct party to this, so it is a bit objective. But I thought I'd choose a difficult chart to illustrate the nuances we have to deal with in our astrology. So let's have a look now, which you may well have done before, at Jamie Oliver, because his is a very interesting chart. And he's a fascinating character. You know, he's a TV chef. Those of you who are abroad might not know him, but he's in lots and lots of languages, and his films are in lots of TV languages. He came to prominence with a TV series called The Naked Chef, not because he was in the nude cooking, but because he, you know, had very essential, simple, organic, primitive menus. And he was also so amazingly quick and speedy and did them so quickly. Anyway, he was brought up in a pub in the Essex area. He's not highly educated. He's very dyslexic. And he went to catering college. And his first job was at Carluccio's in London, in Neal Street. And then he went to the River Cafe. And when he was there, he was still very young, and there was a film crew filming the cafe and the founders of the cafe. And they noticed him, and they noticed something special and a quality in him. And they offered him a show. They offered him his own show, the Naked Chef. And he's done many activities since then, which I would love to spend ages telling you about, but you can look him up on Wikipedia. And so I thought we'd have a look at his chart just for a few things. It's a mixed bag of symbols, but we can try and delineate what's there and how these might link to a line of good fortune. Now, I was struck when I first looked at the chart by the fact that he's got no Taurus, because I associate foodies with Taurus, and also with organic stuff. He's quite into that. There's also no fixity in the chart to start with. But I'll read through quickly what's there. There's Libra rising, so it's obviously a charmer. Venus is in Cancer. It looks as if it's on the midheaven, but it isn't. It's well into the 9th, that Venus. And it's next to Saturn, which rather dampens down its joy a little, doesn't it? Although it is in Cancer, and I do think Venus in Cancer knows how to cook. I think next to Taurus, Cancer is probably, Taurus likes food, likes eating it, but Cancer likes catering and cooking it, doesn't it? It's like feeding people. Let me feed you. This is Venus in Cancer, I think. And it's next to Saturn, bit of a damper, and it's square to Jupiter. So you've got the benefics, right? The two good fortunate planets there in square aspect, and they're quite close in the square with Saturn in between them. And he's a Gemini, I must say he's a Gemini, very fast, very quick. But what we notice with that Gemini is that it's part of one of two major oppositions in the chart. The Sun in Gemini is opposite Neptune from the 8th to the 2nd. And the Mars in Aries, dignified, is opposite the Pluto in the 6th to the 12th. So we've got two oppositions. And those oppositions key into each other by trine and sextile. So the Sun trines Pluto, sextiles Mars. That's a bit speedy, isn't it? Sun sextile Mars in Aries, Sun in Gemini. And the other opposition, where am I going? The Sun Neptune also has an outlet through a trine and a sextile to the Mars Pluto. So then they're not easy aspects, those. I mean, the 2nd and 8th, the 8th house is difficult, the 12th house can be difficult, the 6th house can work hard, but you know, they're not like houses that you, and aspects that you would look at and think, oh, brilliant chart, you know, fame, fortune for this man here in his youth, and he's kept going, hasn't he? So it's not an easy chart. The one interesting, very nice thing he does have is the moon trine Uranus. Not the moon, Mercury in Gemini trine Uranus. That's a very strong trine, which is probably about the dyslexia. Although the not being able to read and having bad schooling and education might also be that moon in Capricorn in the 3rd. But Mercury Uranus does have a different vision, doesn't it? It does see things on the page in a different jumpy kind of a way. So there's a mixture of good and difficult aspects in this chart. It's hard to say where his good fortune and prosperity lies. And what begins to matter is how this picture unfolds. And more important, what Jamie makes of them, right? How the diamond might show in all of this, we're wondering. What is the soul up to here? How can the diamond help? How can we astrologers see that, is my question. Well, a key step for us as astrologers is in the timing measures of progressions and transits. Now, whichever timing measures you've chosen to reveal the symbols, you know, people choose different things. Some people love solar returns and primaries and goodness what. I work with progressions and transits. So let's just see what shows at various times of his life. And I'll show you some progressions for 4 very important events. The first was when he got his opportunity, the Naked Chef, in 1999. The second was when he set up a chain of restaurants in a company he made called Jamie's Italian Company, Jamie's Italian. And then there was a whole phase of restaurant closures, and then the whole thing went into receivership, went into administration. And if we follow through the progressions for these incidents, I think they're very, very revealing. So I could look first of all at the progressions. I think I'll go on to the next slide because they might be on there as well. Yes, let's do the first one first, the Naked Chef, when he was discovered, as it were, and he became known, really, when he was spotted, really. And it's fascinating that at that time, if you look at his progressions, he's got an absolutely major progression, a very slow forming progression, that Jupiter at 15 Aries progresses to the descendant of 19 Aries. And the program was April 99 when it was aired, but his progressed Jupiter went to the descendant in February 98. And then during the time it was actually aired, it was the Sun progressed trine Uranus, which is covering that whole period. And in a sense, this is him being spotted by the other, isn't it? Jupiter in Aries progressed onto the descendant. It's been admired by others. And look at the backup transit, how progressions and transits work together. He's got a transit of Jupiter conjunct the descendant as well as that progression of Jupiter going to the descendant. So the transit triggers the progression and brings it out into the world. And what I think as well, I was surprised it's the progressed Sun to Uranus. Astrology always surprises you when you do these timing measures, doesn't it? Because you think, oh, his career must be the Venus in Cancer in some way, the cooking, and why is the moon ruling the 10th and it's not doing so well? But then you see the Sun rules the intersected Leo, and it's almost like about Jamie Oliver, isn't it? It's about him, it's about his creativity and his authenticity. And in a way, when the progressed Sun goes to the trine of Uranus, it is his unique talent, really, to absolute unusual creativity. These are the qualities he has that create his good fortune. And so this is what shows, not his Venus, his Dempsey or his moon. It's the Sun ruling the intersected 10th, success through individual creativity. And through doing, when we said, will you do well? Well, what he's doing in the Ficino manner as well is what he's doing is Jamie Oliver. He's doing him. He's doing the thing he loves. He's doing what is essential to what he's here for, really, because it's solar. And good fortune lies in his talent. It's not out there. It's not in the cosmos. And it's not in money as prosperity, because we've got a problem here with his money. If you look, his money is shown by this Mars-Pluto opposition, because both Mars and Pluto rule the second house. Now, this is not part of this good fortune, this, coming to public prominence and the things going well for him. I mean, he had a brilliant few years. In that same year as 1999, he was invited, because of this program, to cook for Tony Blair in Downing Street for a meal. He was being dyslexic. His cookery book was on the top seller list for months and months and months in the UK. So, to have that when you're dyslexic, it must have been amazing for him, really. And the money, which we would often associate with prosperity, doing well, it's nothing at all, is it? It doesn't seem lucky for him. Mars is opposite Pluto in the 12th, this house of self-undoing. And it's also, if you look at money in his chart, look at his second house, you don't just see the Scorpio and the Mars Pluto there, you see the Neptune, and you see the Neptune opposite the Sun. So you wouldn't have a lot of confidence that that was actually fortunate, would you? So the diamond is going to seek to support his Sun Uranus and that amazing Jamie Oliver talent, not his desire to make a fast buck on that Mars Pluto opposition. So then when he wind on some years, he becomes terribly famous. Everybody loves him because he's such a charmer. He sets up these Jamie's Italians, and it's very fascinating what happens. He creates 42 restaurants in the UK, plus loads of restaurants abroad, and he franchises a lot abroad. And look what happens when he creates a company. That Uranus pops up again, but this time Mars is opposing by progression that Uranus, and it's very closely that opposition. And Jupiter as a transit, before it was happily on his descendant and everybody loved him, Jupiter is now opposite his Venus. And that's when he really needed a chat with an astrologer to figure out if it was a good idea to start building an empire of restaurants. 42 in the UK, you know, note that Jupiter opposite Venus is, you know, really trying to expand, isn't it? So you get that, you start to get the hint that the Sun Neptune is a bit too wild, isn't it? And notice that the Venus rules the 8th of debt. So, and somehow this is all about money. The Mars rules his 2nd house. He's gone into business, right? The Mars is opposite Uranus. So we've got a clash between this creative, unique talent that was shown in the Uranus and his desire to actually prosper from that in terms of cash and real money. So why, if it's all about money and making money, where's his creative stuff all gone? Why should the diamond help him out, really? If he just wants money, it brings out the worst of the symbols. It brings out the worst, not the best in himself, right? Thinking he's getting rich and prosperous. Note also his Venus ruling the 8th of death. And I would suspect that in this venture, he doesn't know himself. He doesn't know how difficult money is for him, and he lacks a certain wisdom. He's lost his creative way at this point. He's a talented cook, not a finance person, and not an empire builder. And what then happens is, you know, I do wish he'd consulted an astrologer, although, you know, he's very welcome to consult us now, but I would like the money up front, really, because as you see what is about to happen, you know, things go very badly wrong, and we do not have a line of good fortune here. So what happens is, by January 2017, there's an announcement which closes down 6 of the restaurants and tries to do a deal with creditors to actually stay afloat. And they put various strategies in place. And that is on the progressed Sun square Jupiter. And note, and also in January 2018, a year later, the progressed Sun has obviously moved on a degree, so it's moved from the square of Jupiter to the conjunction of Saturn. So that's not fun, is it? Progressed Sun conjunct Saturn. That is indicative of difficulties. And we know we've got some very difficult transits during these 2 announcements as well. We've got Pluto opposite Saturn, and Jupiter before was conjunct the descendant. Now it's come round to the ascendant. And also in January 2018, we have Pluto now opposite Venus and Saturn crossing the moon. And note that this whole period is his Uranus half return. So I'm very interested in that. He started out with the Uranus, the Sun to the Uranus. He had trouble with forming these companies for money when Mars was opposite Uranus. And now, you know, in his Uranus half return, it's as if he's got to do some kind of transition to get back to his unique talent and not to be dissociated. Dissociation is a Uranus concept, isn't it? He mustn't dissociate from his own creative center and from his own diamond. And just so that I want to show you that these debts are very real. You know, we're talking not just about the psychology of Jamie Oliver, but of things in the world. You know when you're not doing well, let me put it that way. You know when you're not doing well, when in the creditors' agreement, the court papers revealed that his Italian debts he had, they were over 71.5 million. The ones I've listed here, they add up to about 73 million, but this is what Wikipedia said. So he owed 2.2 million in wages owed to staff, 30.2 million of overdrafts and loans, and 41.3 million was owed to landlords, tax, customs, suppliers, and other creditors. And by the time the business collapsed, which it did do in May 2019, most of the 80 million owed by that time wouldn't be recovered. Hundreds of suppliers, as well as some town councils, bore the brunt of the losses. And in 2020, an employment tribunal ruled that his restaurant had broken the labour laws by failing to consult employees prior to making them redundant. So if I then put that on to his final administration, we have a Mars-Pluto progression and progressive to natal quincunx. Remember, they were the two planets that were talking about his money. And also, I'd like to point out now that right now, as we speak, you know, he's going to be having this Pluto to-ing and fro-ing across his IC. It started on the 21st of March. I think Pluto's retrograde at the moment, isn't it? About 25, but it's going to come back again. In a sense, you know, in a sense, I think that's him really being at a very, very low point, really. It is a bit at the pits, isn't it? Because Pluto's been opposite Venus, so it is a bit at the pits. And with those money planets having been in quincunx at the time. So to reiterate our point then, you know, I think this comes from not knowing yourself, doesn't it? Like, it's stick to cooking is what you want to say, really. And such difficulty in this is really showing a line of misfortune rather than a line of good fortune, I think. So I want to reiterate a point to you about planetary motion. It seems as if it's unfolding. When we look at these transits and progressions, they're all moving, you know, by aspect, and they're coming, triggering things off as you go. But as if the transits and progressions, you know, are like some clockwork thing. You know, oh, he's got Sun trine Uranus by progression. Oh, he's got Mars progressed opposite Pluto. But that would only be to see the symbols as if they were like a cosmic clock, wouldn't it, in some way? And so I want to, one of the ways we tend to look at these planetary motion is, this is a lovely drawing from Zia in our book. She did a cosmic carousel. I love it. It's all the little horses, right, with all the little planets on. They're all going up and down, and they're all going round and round and round. So there's all these heavy transits, you know, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. They're all going around, and we're looking in our ephemeris, and we're looking them up on our computer programs. And it's as if, because they're all spinning around quite happily, it's as if it's like a machine. And I know some of you know Jeffrey Cornelius's work, and he coined the phrase machine of destiny. It's as if we're spinning out a destiny for ourselves with this planetary motion. But if we take that attitude and don't see it is what we make of the symbols through what we actually do in the world, it just all tumbles down, really. There's no machine of destiny. So if you think this way in your astrology, how your astrology will end up is like this, which Sia also drew for us. It all just jangles up and collapses, you know, and you can't figure out, it's not the way divination and astrology works, because you're not participating, you're not doing anything. So there is no machine of destiny. There's just human being seeking to find good fortune for ourselves, knowing ourselves, knowing what we can do and what we can create, knowing when we, you know, the diamond's on our side or not. And the symbolism guides us on that, I think. It doesn't determine it for us, but it's not psychological. It's not, you know, like the humanistic astrologers might think, you know, oh, it's all inner and intrapsychic. It's not. It's in the world. It's our soul and the world soul. You know, it's an interchange of the things we do in the world. I want to tell you, some of you might have heard me talk about this before, but it was such a fascinating thing for me that it was such a teaching for me that I think it might interest you along these lines of finding a line of good fortune. So what happened to me was that one day I was telephoned by the secretary who organised the weekly meetings for astrologers at the Urania Trust. They don't have those meetings now, but they did then. And the speaker for that evening was suddenly unable to attend, and I was asked if I could possibly go along to stand in and give a lecture on eclipses. Well, I thought I'd quite like to do that because I've always been interested in eclipses. And although I had enough on my plate, I had a feeling that I ought to do the talk, right? So I prepared some notes and charts, gave the talk that evening, and that was fine, okay, in London. And afterwards, as is customary, a whole bunch of astrologers from the meeting went to the pub next door. And I happened to sit next to a particular astrologer whom I knew slightly. And I asked how he was getting on these days. And he said, oh, things were working really well for him. How are you doing? Oh, I'm doing well. And just that week, he said, he'd written to a magazine hoping to find work. And he had suggested to the editor that if she had an overflow of people who wanted their charts doing, I wish, and the magazine's astrologer couldn't cope, he would like to offer his services as a consultant. And the editor had written back to him expressing interest in his work and had asked him if he would provide a sample astrology column for her magazine because she wasn't happy with its astrologer and was thinking of making a change. So I asked him which magazine this was. And when he told me, I was absolutely stunned. It was a magazine which I wrote for, right, under a different name, right? So he couldn't have known that. He couldn't have known that. And for a brief moment, I mischievously debated with myself whether or not to tell him. But I did tell him. And he was, of course, horrified to be face to face with someone whose job he was hoping to get. Right. So for me, it was a remarkable series of events which led to the revelation that my job was under threat. Right. So quite a lot of factors, when you think about it, had to come together to make the coincidence possible. The logistics of the day could have gone a different way at a number of points. When the UT secretary called, I could have had a prior engagement, or I could have said no. I could have given the lecture and not gone to the pub afterwards. I could have gone to the pub and sat next to one of 20 or so other people. And instead, I sat next to this particular guy and thus mysteriously was warned of the threat of losing my work. So what a lovely irony is here, eh? Having decided to give a lecture on eclipses, I find myself about to be eclipsed. Astrology, honestly. Well, I was shocked by the circumstances, but not surprised at the news because I'd not been happy anyway with the copy I was producing for the magazine. My original editor had left some time previously and I'd still not met the new editor. She didn't know me and had never been interested in discussing the column. However, because I made my living through astrology then, I did need the earnings from that magazine. To lose it would be a real burden and I would have to make up the work some other way. I therefore timed the moment of my exchange with the astrologer in the pub and he timed it too. There wasn't really anything else we could say to each other under the circumstances. I decided to look at the chart as a horary to see what this coincidence wished to show me. Right, so what does it wish to show me? So let's have a look at this chart. Right, I called it eclipsed chart. Well, I know some of you don't know horary, but I think you know astrology. So if I talk you through it, you'll follow it. You follow it. I'm sure you will. The chart can be judged. Some charts can't be judged. This one can. Taurus rises. Okay, 10 Taurus rises. So I am the planet that rules the ascendant. I am Venus because Venus rules Taurus. So there is Venus. You can see her squiggled away there on the 6th cusp at 15 Virgo 31. Now Venus is in fall in Virgo and she's in the house of work, and that very aptly describes me in this situation. This is a job, this is work. It's not fun, it's not really what I love, writing columns, but it's work, isn't it? Writing sun sign columns has always been a bread and butter job for me. And that's distinct to the 10th house, which is a house of career, isn't it? But look how weak Venus is. She's very weakened in her fall. And this reflects the regular but tedious and routine nature of the work itself. Venus in Virgo, every week or every day or every month, you have to produce this column. And the weak position I am now in as regards the threat of losing that work. So it's a bit of bind, isn't it? And by contrast, I'm also co-signified, because the moon always shows the person asking the question, by this moon sitting on the ascendant, exalted in Taurus, very angular, very powerful. And the moon represents the situation as a whole, really. But more specifically here, it's my concern, it's me, about my money, honey, you know, about my financial situation, the good earnings from this work, right? My prosperity in terms of cash, as it were. Well, the other astrologer, right, who is sitting next to me in the pub after my job, is shown by the 7th, this other person, shown by Scorpio. Therefore, you take the traditional ruler, you look at Mars first. You look at Mars, Lord of the 7th. And Mars, the 7th, of course, is enemies and competitors as well, isn't it? As love affairs and partners. So this Mars is an aggressor because it's Mars. It's another writer, Mars in Gemini, right? And he's in the 2nd of my finances, right? So he's clearly desirous to get his hands on my money. Now, the sun sign column, the work and the money under contention, can now be taken, I think, as Mercury in Leo on the 5th, you know, because Mercury rules the 2nd of money. It's on the 5th house, which is the sun's house. So it's a bit like Mercury in Leo is creative writing, isn't it? Ruler of both the 6th of work and the 2nd of money. So I think that because this Mercury disposes of both me and him, because I'm in Virgo, Mercury sign, he's in Gemini, Mercury sign, that Mercury in Leo writing its heart out with the sun sign columns, that is the column itself, really, the magazine. And it disposes of both of us, right? So it's also the day of Mercury, Mercury's planetary hour. And it's very strange that these two astrologers caught by chance in Mercury's tricky moment sitting next to each other in the pub, rather like that. So where's the editor of the magazine? Well, she's shown by Saturn in Aquarius in the 11th, because she is the judge and ultimate authority, isn't she? She will decide the matter. She's ruling the 10th, Capricorn, Saturn. She's in the 11th. She's in her dignity. And she's clearly a force to be reckoned with here, this editor. So let's see how these factors tie up with each other. The most immediate and obvious thing that's going to happen in the chart is that Venus, which is me, is going to square the other astrologer, the Mars, which is him, right? So Venus at 15 Virgo 31 is applying to the square of Mars at 15 Gemini 53. And of the two significators, right, Mars is stronger because of the falling condition of Venus in Virgo. And in any contest between us, he's going to be the victor. He's going to win this, isn't he? Because he's stronger than me. And this doesn't bode well for my chances of keeping the job at all. Ironically, however, as the other astrologer had also done the same moment, I was aware that for him, he would see himself as Venus and me as the Mars. So neither of us would wish to be shown by such a weak Venus, as she can do nothing but move to square the opponent. But here is the key point, the one thing I want to tell you and I want you to know. We must remember that planetary motion doesn't equate with human fate. And simply because the significators, the Venus and the Mars, signifying both people, because they're applying to perfect, to make an aspect, it doesn't mean that events are predetermined and that they will unfold according to the nature of that aspect. The symbolic showing of the planetary aspect gives us an option that the querent can choose to take up in the world or not. So if I choose to identify with Venus in Virgo and act accordingly, I get really weak, I'm really worried, I'm critical, I'm carping on about losing my job. I'll put myself in conflict with the other astrologer, and I'm unlikely to achieve success or good fortune by doing so. Instead, I must look to see if there is a line of good fortune for me in the chart. What might this be? What might this line of good fortune be? Well, I decided to become the moon, right? Because the great strength in the chart comes from the moon's dignity and her angular placing on the ascendant. She dominates the chart, and her past and next aspects reveal the situation further. She's separating from a square of Mercury. She's 858 Taurus. Mercury is 844 Leo. So this separation is coming off the square of the column, isn't it? And her next aspect reveals the situation. She applies to a square of Saturn. Saturn is 14 Aquarius. The moon's next aspect would be square Saturn. So if we her recent square indicates the immediate circumstances that we've had over the column, and her application to Saturn means facing the boss, right? Means an encounter with the editor, right? The incident brings forth the question of whether I can hang on to the job or if I am about to be eclipsed. So the forthcoming moon square Saturn is the perfection of the matter. And since both planets are strong because they have dignity, you know, they're both in rulership, a perfection by square might be possible, but as a universal, by nature, gloomy Saturn brings matters to an end and suggests a time of reckoning. I think, in truth, I had to acknowledge that since I'd been coasting for some time and had never put much creative energy into it, my time with this column might be over. In fact, although I'd been writing the column for that magazine for several years and had already survived survived a previous change of editor, this particular editor had not been in the job long, and I'd not met her, nor had any personal dealings with her. And in the media world, and I had, that's not a good idea really. I could see that from her point of view, fairly mediocre copy from someone she'd never met was not her best option. So I could be about to receive just desserts for my own lack of dynamism. It's getting very dark in here. Sorry, it doesn't look as if it is, but suddenly the dark evenings are cutting in, aren't they? So in the light of this moon square Saturn, moon square Saturn getting so dark, a further interpretation of the moon Saturn square as a lack of personal touch between the editor and I became possible. And the outcome depends on the relationship of the moon and Saturn. And I've got considerable strength as the moon, but the moon is very apparent on the horizon, and she's in the physical bodily sign of Taurus. So remembering Geoffrey Cornelius's Horary about his aunt's house, which had the moon on the ascendant, and in effect the aunt had to make a physical appearance in court. I don't know if any of you remember that much. I decided that as the moon was in Taurus in this chart, on the ascendant, I had actually to go and meet the editor. Like a planet on the ascendant, which rises and comes into being out of the darkness beneath the horizon, in order to avoid being invisible and eclipsed, I had to be physically appearing before her and to be present to her. Thanks. Can we have some light, Geoffrey, please? So I therefore decided to become like the moon in Taurus, to take hold of the situation and try to secure my own personal finances, right? I called the editor and asked for a meeting, to which she readily agreed. And I thought that it was best to confront her directly with the situation as I understood it. And when we met, I explained to her that the reason for my visit was that I'd become worried that she didn't like the column and could be thinking about replacing me. I obviously couldn't mention the incident with the other astrologer, because if she was going to replace me anyway, this would botch his chances of taking over, which I didn't obviously want to do. So, however, a very odd playing out of the chart took place at this point. In the absence of any other explanation of why I thought she might want rid of me, she assumed she assumed that I knew this entirely from my astrological expertise. And I knew immediately when she made this assumption that I had the chance to evoke in the chart a mutual reception. And this is to do with the planets Saturn and Uranus. If you look at Saturn, it's in Aquarius. If you look at Uranus, it's in Capricorn. So they're in each other's signs. And when you get that mutual reception in Horary, you can also swap them round and navigate between them. And people like Ivy Goldstein Jacobson and Derek Appleby often said that you could swap them round and they would hold their degree. So if Saturn is 14 Aquarius, you can move Saturn into Capricorn at 14 Capricorn, and you can move Uranus back into Aquarius, where it would still, as it happens, be 14 Aquarius. And if you do that, you see, it's very interesting what happens. Uranus is in Capricorn next to Neptune in the 10th, edging into the 9th house. Saturn is the editor of the 10th. And I take Uranus as a universal significator for astrology next to psychic Neptune. So the editor then, hearing this, denied she was looking for someone else because she thought I was such a brilliant astrologer. But it became evident to me from our conversation that she believed I must be psychic because I'd known I was going to get the sack. Because after all, I'd known in advance about her intention to get rid of me. And in a way, of course, astrology had shown me the way forward, but not in the simple predictive sense that she understood. So as the moon in Taurus, I was in no mood to dispel her wrong assumptions, because by making the Saturn-Uranus reception by degree, Saturn moves to 14 Capricorn, where it receives a trine of the moon rather than a square. So if I leave Saturn in Aquarius and don't make the reception and don't act as if I'm a wonderful psychic brilliant astrologer, I'm going to square Saturn. If I make the reception with Saturn and Uranus, the moon's next aspect will be to a trine of Saturn in the 9th, right? So me and the editor like that, right? That's the idea. The editor and I did turn out to get along really well, and I kept the job, and I stayed at the magazine for the next 10 years until 2002, throughout her editorship and several other editors after that. So my point here is that this chart is a good example of how important it is to find a line of good fortune that enables a person, either in a horary or in a natal, to take an initiative in the situation rather than passively await the outcome of events. Without such an attitude, we would be left with a fated astrology, a machine of destiny. And in this situation, I would have awaited two difficult perfections. If you think of that chart, I would have just sat back and waited Venus to square Mars, and I would have got butchered on the Mars. And I would have waited Moon to go to the square of Saturn. And, I would have probably lost that one as well, because Saturn rules the 10th and, she's in charge here. So just because the Venus-Mars square is technically happening in the ephemeris, and in the sky and in the chart, it doesn't mean that I am fated along the lines of its symbolism. Instead, I decline to go there. And by taking up the moon and her strength, by acting out her symbolism, I'm able to make the best move forward for myself in the situation.
Thank you so much.